famous monetary
Let's
policy
do it.
checklist, Mark. Look, and we've got to go through these list of things. For the moment, the GDP numbers, we've got annual growth of 2.7%. That's a good number. We're growing reasonable. It's down from where we were, but neutral. Inflation, we've spoken about that, way too high. If that was the only indicator that the RBA was looking at, and there are more, they'd be hiking and hiking and hiking. Seven's just
But it has
too
the
low.
most weight on it. It is the most
It
important
is
indicator.
the most important thing. The labour market. Now, this is a curious one. I'll put that in between tightening, 3.5 unemployment's nice and low. Wages are picking up. They're not a problem. But then we've got things like job ads turning down. So it's not quite into neutral yet. And these top things are the most important in this checklist. I'll just want to repeat that.
And just so just for the sake of when you say labour market, you mean unemployment.
Unemployment in particular.
Yeah.
Here's the wages number. I'll put that in neutral because wages growth is 3.3%. The Reserve Bank have said that that is consistent with their 2 to 3% inflation target. So that's neutral. 3.3% wage growth. Yep, that's happy days if we can keep that going. International economy. Well, the Fed is still hiking. The European Central Bank is still hiking. So I'll move that to between neutral and easing. But we do know, as we discussed, the world economy is weakening. Commodity prices are coming down. That's probably neutral to slightly easing. House prices have started going up. I'm just going to stick that in neutral. They fell about 9% from the peak in early 2022 to early 2023. And the increase is 0.5% a month. Could be a dead cat bounce, could be just not a lot of stock and the big increase in immigration that's caused that. But I don't think the RBA would be worried on the up or the downside on house prices.
So what's interesting about that is that our mates at Westpac are saying they've reviewed their 15% from trough to peak, or peak to trough, reduction now back down to 10%. So they're sort of taking a view. We don't think at this stage that house prices are going to fall too much more.
And just as I was coming in here, CBA, who've got the biggest mortgage book in Australia, revised their house price view. I think we're looking at something like minus 15%, if I remember correctly. They're now saying during 2023, house prices slightly up. During 2024, plus 5%.
That's interesting.
CBA have now, they're not super strong, but we've seen the worst, put it that way.
5% is not a bad sustainable
Not a bad.
rate.
If we could get that, that'd be a nice thing. Retail sales, I'm moving that between neutral and easing. They have slowed a lot, but we consumers are still spending. And while the heat's come out of it, we're not quite yet capitulating. So that's probably more
Do you think
neutral.
people are using credit cards? Is there any credit cards? Is there any data out to say there's a greater use of credit cards now?
There is data, but it's not showing much. What's happening, and they're running down their savings. Remember during the pandemic, and we heard the RBA governor...
250 billion.
Yeah, going on about how much money people squirreled away their money, or they just couldn't spend it. We're stuck at home watching Netflix, being locked at home rather than now that we've gone out, they're running down their savings, which actually helps support consumer spending. Even though it's slowed down, it's not fallen off a cliff. Consumer sentiment, weak. We consumers are feeling glum. Cost of living, higher interest rates. It's a pretty simple one. Building approvals. Now, this is what causing me some concern. I'll put that in the easing side because building approvals are at their lowest level in a decade.
They dropped off a cliff.
And part of that was a bring forward because remember that one of the stimulus measures that Mr. Frydenberg quite rightly brought in during the pandemic was a bring forward of construction. You know, you go outside and build, so it wasn't quite impacted like many other sectors. So we had a bring forward of housing construction. So now we've got a big slump in housing construction. The other thing that worries me is a lot of building companies are going belly up. They've got the fixed price contracts. Cost of buildings gone up a lot. Availability of tradies, very, very tough. So that says to me that we're not going to build a lot of houses.
Is it
bad for GDP because we're not building as many houses as we need.
And is there much data out there to say, in terms of the current stock of construction contracts or buildings that are being currently built, when does that stop? In other words, because there was a big, as you said, there was a big build up of new business, new building approvals. That
in 21-22
became jobs for tradies, etc., around the country.
Yep.
And then, do we know when that's going to run down?
It's still got a bit of momentum because it takes, as we know, to build a dwelling, and this includes high-rise dwellings. On average, it takes between 12 and 18 months for a bit of dirt to turn into a finished dwelling where someone can move into, because that's what matters. So we've probably got, what do we call it, completions, dwelling completions data, the ABS Bureau of Statistics have them as well. They're still quite resilient. They've just tilted down a little bit,
Right.
but they lag behind building approvals by 3/4, by about 9 months.
Right.
So it'll be later this year that we'll get that number declining.
Yeah, sometimes toward the end of this year, we're going to start to see the impact of that,
Correct.
and that'll affect spending.
Correct. So the next couple of items, business investment, doing well. I'll put that in neutral.
Still positive.
Still positive. Businesses are ramping up their investment on IT, on equipment, machinery, even things like warehouses and stuff. So there's a bit not booming. So I wouldn't put that in the tightening case because we want to see some business investment, but it's sort of neutral. It's fine. RBA is not worried about it. It's not weakening. Same with business confidence. The good old NAB survey's got business confidence pretty resilient. We consumers are feeling gloomy. Businesses are feeling okay. Commodity prices, they've come off. I'm going to put that in neutral too. So I've got a lot of neutral buttons down the middle here. Commodity prices have come off, but they're still quite high. You know, when we were saying before that oil's $80 a barrel, a couple of years ago it was 60. So they're higher than they were a few years ago, even though they've come off their height. Same with iron ore, so important to the Australian economy. Still about $115 a tonne. You know, the Fortescue Minerals, BHP, Rio, their cost of production is about $25-30 a tonne. They're making a truckload of cash. So they've come off the boil, but they're still okay. Stock market, resilient. It's been choppy every morning. I wake up and look at the Dow. It's up 100, down 200, whatever, but it's actually neutral. Not an important thing for the RBA.
Except in wealth.
Except if it crashes.
Except for when you feel wealthy or don't feel wealthy.
Correct. You look at your super and think, oh, gee, I've made a lot of money this year. It can have a sentiment effect, but it's sort of not, and unless it crashes, 20% in the month or 20% in the day, they generally don't look at it. It's worth having on our monetary policy checklist more for when if it goes up and down 1% a month, who cares? It's when these get these big booms or the big busts that occur, which happen from time to time.
Which is happening.
And the current rates, I'm going to put them in I'm going to move them towards between neutral and easing because they are tight, as we've discussed many times. 3.6% official cash rate, mortgage rates close to 6%. That's not a low interest rate anymore. They were a year and a half ago. They're not now. So, do they need to keep hiking and hiking and hiking as we've just discussed? Probably not. So I look down my checklist. The important things, there's a couple here that point to tightening or neutral. Things that are not unimportant, but not the dominant things are on the easing side, but most of them down the middle. So my monetary policy checklist is shouting at me, on hold when the RBA meets tomorrow.
Okay, so on hold, but importantly, don't expect rate reductions.
Oh, no rate
For a while.
Until these are the two buttons that have to move to at least neutral, or be erring towards neutral. We're not going to get a rate cut.